For the last 5 decades, science has managed to delineate the mechanisms by which stress hormones can impact the human brain. Receptors for glucocorticoids are found in the hippocampus, amygdala, and frontal cortex, 3 brain regions involved in memory processing and emotional regulation. Studies have shown that chronic exposure to stress is associated with reduced volume of the hippocampus, and that chronic stress can modulate volumes of both the amygdala and frontal cortex, suggesting neurotoxic effects of stress hormones on the brain. Yet other studies report that exposure to early adversity and/or familial or social stressors can increase vulnerability to stress in adulthood. Models have been recently developed to describe the roles that neurotoxic and vulnerability effects can have on the developing brain. Hey guys, for more enthralling content like this, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's get started. Chronic stress, a persistent state of heightened psychological and physiological tension, can intricately shape the brain's structure and function, influencing various aspects of cognitive and emotional well-being. Delving into the detailed effects of chronic stress on the brain reveals a complex interplay between hormonal, structural, and functional changes. Hippocampal atrophy. The hippocampus, a critical region for memory and learning, is particularly vulnerable to the effects of chronic stress. Prolonged exposure to stress hormones, particularly cortisol, has been associated with the atrophy of neurons in the hippocampus. This structural change may impair the formation of new memories and contribute to difficulties in spatial navigation and cognitive flexibility. Neurotransmitter dysregulation. Neurotransmitter dysregulation and stress are interconnected phenomena that often influence each other in a complex manner. Chronic stress can significantly impact the balance and functioning of neurotransmitters, contributing to various mental health issues. Here's a closer look at the relationship between neurotransmitter dysregulation and stress. Impact of stress on neurotransmitters. Cortisol release. Chronic stress activates the body's stress response, leading to the release of stress hormones, particularly cortisol. Elevated cortisol levels can influence neurotransmitter systems. Serotonin reduction. Prolonged stress is associated with a reduction in serotonin levels. Serotonin, known as the feel-good neurotransmitter, plays a key role in mood regulation. Low serotonin levels are linked to conditions like depression and anxiety. Dopamine and norepinephrine dysregulation. Overstimulation. Chronic stress can result in the overstimulation of dopamine and norepinephrine systems. This heightened activity is associated with the fight-or-flight response and can contribute to feelings of restlessness, anxiety, or hyperarousal. Exhaustion. Prolonged stress may eventually lead to exhaustion of these neurotransmitter systems, potentially contributing to symptoms of fatigue, apathy, or even depression. GABA inhibition. Reduced activity. Stress can inhibit the activity of GABA, the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. GABA is responsible for promoting relaxation and reducing anxiety. Reduced GABA activity may contribute to heightened stress and anxiety levels. Glutamate excitability. Excessive release. Stress can lead to excessive release of glutamate, the primary excitatory neurotransmitter. This increased excitability may contribute to neurotoxicity and is implicated in conditions such as anxiety disorders and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Neurotransmitter imbalances and mental health. Depression and anxiety. Neurotransmitter dysregulation, particularly involving serotonin and norepinephrine, is a common feature in mood disorders such as depression and anxiety. Trauma, or PTSD. Stressful or traumatic experiences can result in long-lasting changes in neurotransmitter systems, contributing to the development of PTSD. Vicious cycle. The relationship between stress and neurotransmitter dysregulation often forms a vicious cycle. Chronic stress can lead to changes in neurotransmitter function, and these altered neurotransmitter levels may, in turn, influence an individual's ability to cope with stress. Endocrine system disruption. The stress response is a fundamental physiological mechanism designed to mobilize the body's resources to cope with immediate threats. This intricate process involves the release of hormones, prominently cortisol and adrenaline, which prepare the body for a fight-or-flight response. While these hormonal releases are crucial for short-term stress management, the persistent activation of the stress response can lead to significant disruptions, particularly in the endocrine system. Chronic stress, characterized by prolonged and unrelenting stressors, can disturb the delicate balance of the endocrine system. The endocrine system is a complex network of glands that secrete hormones regulating various bodily functions. Elevated cortisol levels, a hallmark of chronic stress, can have far-reaching effects on the body. Impaired memory consolidation. Prolonged exposure to high levels of cortisol, often referred to as the stress hormone, have been linked to impaired memory consolidation. This means that chronic stress may negatively impact the ability to form and store new memories, affecting cognitive functions and learning processes. Decreased immune function. Chronic stress has been associated with a compromised immune system. Elevated cortisol levels can suppress immune responses, making individuals more susceptible to infections and illnesses. This weakened immune function contributes to the overall health consequences of chronic stress. Structural changes in the brain. The persistent elevation of cortisol levels in chronic stress has been implicated in structural changes in the brain, specifically the hippocampus, a brain region crucial for memory and emotional regulation, may undergo atrophy. This structural alteration is associated with cognitive deficits and an increased risk of mental health disorders. Altered brain connectivity. Chronic stress not only affects hormonal balance, but also has profound implications for the connectivity between different brain regions. One critical aspect is the interplay between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. Changes in amygdala and prefrontal cortex connectivity. The amygdala, a key player in emotional processing and the brain's threat detection system, communicates with the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive functions such as decision-making and emotional regulation. Chronic stress can lead to alterations in the connections between these regions. Heightened emotional responses. The disturbed connectivity between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex may contribute to heightened emotional responses. This heightened emotional reactivity can manifest as increased anxiety, exaggerated reactions to stressors, and difficulties in regulating emotions effectively. Increased risk of emotional disorders. The dysregulated amygdala and prefrontal cortex connectivity is associated with an increased risk of emotional disorders, including anxiety and mood disorders. Individuals experiencing chronic stress may find it challenging to modulate their emotional responses, contributing to the development or exacerbation of mental health conditions. Inflammatory response. Chronic stress triggers a state of chronic inflammation in the body, extending to the brain. Neuroinflammation is increasingly recognized as a contributing factor to various neurological and psychiatric disorders. The inflammatory response of the brain may exacerbate conditions such as depression and cognitive decline. Impaired neurogenesis. Chronic stress has been associated with reduced neurogenesis, the process by which new neurons are generated. This reduction, particularly in the hippocampus, may contribute to difficulties in forming new memories and adapting to novel experiences. The link between impaired neurogenesis and the pathophysiology of mood disorders is an area of active research. Increased vulnerability to mental health disorders. The cumulative impact of chronic stress significantly increases vulnerability to mental health disorders. Depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, are often linked to prolonged exposure to stressors. Individuals with a history of chronic stress may be more susceptible to developing these conditions. Cognitive decline and aging. Long-term exposure to chronic stress may contribute to accelerated cognitive decline and aging. The potential link between chronic stress and neurodegenerative conditions, such as Alzheimer's disease, is a subject of ongoing investigation. Chronic stress is thought to exacerbate the pathological processes associated with cognitive decline. Understanding the detailed effects of chronic stress on the brain emphasizes the importance of proactive stress management strategies. Mindfulness, regular physical activity, social support, and therapeutic interventions are key components of mitigating the negative impact of chronic stress on the brain and fostering overall mental well-being. That's all for today. Thank you for taking the time to watch the video, and remember, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more.